12-year-old Jamal Walker had always been a helpful kid. Growing up in a tight-knit neighborhood, he was raised by his grandmother, Miss Evelyn, who taught him the value of kindness. One late afternoon, as he rode his old bicycle down a quiet road on the outskirts of town, he noticed a sleek black Mercedes parked on the side. A tall man in an expensive suit was crouched beside the car, examining a flat tire with frustration written all over his face. Jamal slowed down, curiosity getting the best of him. He could see the man muttering to himself, tapping his phone against his palm. "Excuse me, sir," Jamal said, hopping off his bike. "Do you need some help?" The man looked up, startled. He was in his late 50s, with sharp features and graying hair. He sighed and shook his head. "Unless you've got a spare tire in that backpack of yours, kid, I'm not sure you can help." Jamal grinned. "Maybe not, but I know how to change a tire. My uncle taught me last summer." The man hesitated before gesturing to the tire. "All right, kid, let's see what you got." Jamal got to work, rolling up his sleeves. The lug nuts were tight, but he managed to loosen them with some effort. As he worked, the man watched him with curiosity. "You're pretty good at this," he admitted. "What's your name?" "Jamal, sir." "Well, Jamal, you might have just saved my day." As Jamal tightened the last bolt, neither of them realized that this simple act of kindness was about to change his life forever. Jamal wiped his hands on his jeans, stepping back to admire his work. The tire was secured, and the once stranded luxury car was now roadworthy again. The man stood up, brushing off his suit pants, and gave Jamal an impressed nod. "You really know what you're doing, kid. You ever thought about being a mechanic?" he asked. Jamal chuckled. "Not really. I just like learning new things. My uncle runs a small repair shop, and I help out sometimes." The man extended his hand. "I'm Charles Whitmore." Jamal hesitated for a second before shaking it. "Nice to meet you, Mr. Whitmore." Charles looked at his watch and sighed. "I had an important meeting across town. If you hadn't stopped, I'd probably still be standing here waiting for roadside assistance." Jamal smiled. "Glad I could help." Charles reached into his wallet, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. "Here, for your trouble." Jamal shook his head. "No, sir, I didn't do it for money." Charles raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "Yes, sir," Jamal said firmly. "My grandma always says you should help people because it's the right thing to do, not because you expect something back." For the first time in a long while, Charles was speechless. He was used to people wanting something from him, money, favors, connections. But this kid? He had stopped just to help, expecting nothing in return. Charles studied Jamal for a moment. There was something special about him. He smiled. "Well, Jamal, I think you just gave me something much more valuable than a tire change. A little faith in people." Jamal grinned. "Glad I could help with that too." As Charles got into his car, an idea started forming in his mind, one that would change Jamal's life in ways he never could have imagined. As Charles Whitmore drove off, he couldn't stop thinking about Jamal. The boy's attitude, his honesty, and his willingness to help without expecting anything in return were rare qualities, especially in the business world Charles lived in. By the time he reached his destination, an idea had fully formed in his mind. He picked up his phone and made a call. "Hey, Jonathan, I need you to find out everything you can about a kid named Jamal. He helped me earlier today. Lives around Willow Street. See what you can dig up." Jonathan, his trusted assistant, was confused but knew better than to question Charles. "Got it, sir. I'll have something by the end of the day." Meanwhile, Jamal had continued on his way home, completely unaware that the man he had helped was one of the richest and most influential businessmen in the city. He reached his grandmother's small house, where he lived with her and his younger sister. "Jamal, where have you been?" his grandmother, Mrs. Carter, asked, looking up from her knitting. "Helped a guy with a flat tire," Jamal said casually, setting his backpack down. "He tried to pay me, but I told him I didn't need it." His grandmother smiled proudly. "That's how I raised you, boy. Good deeds come back around in ways you can't even imagine." Later that evening, as Jamal sat on the porch watching the sunset, an unfamiliar black car pulled up in front of the house. The driver's door opened, and to his shock, Charles Whitmore stepped out, dressed in a sharp suit and a determined expression. Jamal stood up, confused. "Mr. Whitmore?" Charles nodded. "Jamal, I have a proposition for you." Jamal's heart pounded in his chest. What could a millionaire like Charles Whitmore possibly want with him? Jamal stared at Charles Whitmore, unsure of what to say. A millionaire had just shown up at his doorstep. What could he possibly want? Mrs. Carter stepped onto the porch, eyeing the unfamiliar man. "Can we help you, sir?" she asked, her voice polite but cautious. Charles smiled warmly. "Good evening, ma'am. I wanted to talk to Jamal, if that's all right with you." Jamal looked at his grandmother, and she gave him a nod. "Go on, boy, but we'll be right here." Charles gestured toward the car. "Would you mind taking a short drive with me? I promise you'll be safe, and I'll bring you right back." Jamal hesitated. "I don't know. What's this about?" Charles chuckled. "I'll explain everything, but let's just say your kindness today left a strong impression on me, and I think you have potential. I want to help you." Jamal glanced at his grandmother again. She studied Charles for a moment before sighing. "All right, but don't keep him out too long." Jamal climbed into the car, still unsure about what was happening. As they drove through the city, Charles finally spoke. "You remind me of myself when I was younger," he began. "I came from nothing, grew up in a small house, just like you. No fancy schools, no easy life. But I worked hard, and I got to where I am today. And when I see someone like you, someone who doesn't hesitate to help a stranger without expecting anything in return, it tells me a lot about your character." Jamal listened, his hands gripping his knees. "But why are you telling me this?" Charles turned to him with a knowing smile. "Because I want to offer you an opportunity. How would you like to work for me?" Jamal's eyes widened. "Work for you? Doing what?" Charles grinned. "Learning, growing, preparing for a future bigger than you ever imagined." Jamal's mind raced. This was beyond anything he had expected. Could this really be happening? Jamal sat in stunned silence as Charles drove through the city. The streetlights cast a warm glow over the sleek interior of the car, but his mind was racing too fast to notice. "Work for you?" Jamal finally echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't understand. What could I possibly do for a millionaire like you?" Charles chuckled. "It's not about what you can do for me, Jamal. It's about what I can do for you." He took a turn down a quiet road, then continued. "I see potential in you. You're hardworking, kind, and quick thinking. Those are the qualities of someone who can go far in life, if given the right opportunities." Jamal swallowed. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything right now," Charles assured him. "I just want you to think about it. I run a few businesses, and I mentor young people who remind me of myself. I want to give you a chance to learn, not just about business, but about life, responsibility, and success." Jamal felt his chest tighten. No one had ever spoken to him like this before. People saw him as just another kid from a rough neighborhood, but Charles was talking to him like he mattered, like he had a future worth investing in. "But why me?" Jamal asked, still unsure. Charles smiled. "Because you didn't hesitate to help me when I needed it. That kind of character is rare, and I believe in rewarding those who do good in the world." Jamal stared out the window, the weight of the moment settling in. This wasn't just about a job. It was about a different path in life, a way out, a chance at something bigger than he'd ever dreamed. As they pulled back up to his house, Charles turned to him. "Take the night to think about it, Jamal. If you're interested, meet me tomorrow at the address on this card." Jamal took the sleek business card in his hand, his fingers tracing the embossed letters. He nodded slowly. "I'll think about it," he said. Charles smiled. "That's all I ask." As the millionaire drove away, Jamal stood on the porch, staring at the card. His grandmother watched him from the doorway. "What was that about?" she asked. Jamal exhaled deeply. I just got the biggest opportunity of my life." Jamal lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling. The business card Charles had given him rested on his nightstand, the bold letters staring back at him. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. All his life, he had struggled to find opportunities. He had watched his friends get caught up in the streets, some dropping out of school, others getting into trouble. He had always wanted more, but wanting something and getting it were two different things. Now a millionaire had just handed him a lifeline. But was it real? "What if this is too good to be true?" he muttered to himself. His grandmother's voice broke the silence. "Jamal, are you still awake?" He turned to see her standing in the doorway, her robe wrapped tightly around her small frame. Yeah, Grandma, he said, sitting up. She stepped into the room and sat beside him on the bed. You've been quiet since you got home. What's on your mind? Jamal hesitated, then picked up the business card and handed it to her. She examined it, her face unreadable. Charles Donovan, she read aloud. That name sounds familiar. He's a businessman, Jamal explained. He owns a bunch of companies. I helped him with his flat tire today, and now he wants to give me a job, maybe even a future. His grandmother's eyes softened. And what do you think about that? I don't know, Jamal admitted. It sounds amazing, but I'm scared. What if I mess up? What if he changes his mind? What if this isn't real? His grandmother smiled and took his hand. Jamal, opportunities like this don't come every day, but you have to decide for yourself if you're ready to take a chance. Jamal looked down, deep in thought. He had never had a real job before. He didn't know anything about business. What if he wasn't good enough? But then he remembered how Charles had looked at him, not with pity, but with respect. I want to do it, he finally said. I just don't know how. His grandmother squeezed his hand. Then take the first step. Go meet him tomorrow. If it doesn't feel right, you can always walk away. But don't let fear decide for you. Jamal nodded. His grandmother was right. He had spent his whole life letting circumstances control him. Maybe it was time to take control of his own future. As he lay back down, he clutched the business card in his hand. Tomorrow could be the start of something new. He just had to take the leap. The next morning, Jamal woke up with nervous excitement buzzing through his body. He dressed in his cleanest outfit, jeans without rips, a plain white t-shirt, and his only pair of decent sneakers. He wanted to look presentable but still be himself. As he stood in front of the mirror, his grandmother appeared in the doorway. You look good, baby, she said with a proud smile. Just remember, be yourself. That's what got you here in the first place. Jamal nodded, taking a deep breath before heading out. He caught the bus downtown, clutching Charles Donovan's business card tightly in his hand. The office address printed on it led him to a towering skyscraper, the kind he had only seen in movies. As he stood outside, staring up at the gleaming windows, doubt crept in. You don't belong here. A voice in his head whispered, You're just a kid from the neighborhood. What are you doing? But he shook it off. No, he had earned this meeting. Walking inside, he was immediately overwhelmed by the pristine lobby. The floors were marble, the walls decorated with modern art. People in expensive suits bustled around, their conversations sharp and focused. A receptionist, a well-dressed woman with glasses, looked up. Can I help you? Jamal swallowed his nerves. Yeah. I have a meeting with Mr. Charles Donovan. Her eyes briefly scanned him before she checked her computer. Your name? Jamal Brooks. She clicked a few keys, then nodded. He's expecting you. Take the elevator to the 20th floor. Jamal's heart pounded as he stepped into the sleek, mirrored elevator. The ride up felt like an eternity. When the doors finally opened, he found himself in a lavish office space, decorated with framed awards and pictures of Charles with powerful people. And then, there he was, Charles Donovan, sitting behind a large oak desk, smiling as he stood up. Jamal, I'm glad you came, Charles said, shaking his hand firmly. Come, sit. Jamal sat across from him, still unsure what to expect. Charles leaned forward. I won't waste your time. I see something in you, kid. The way you stepped up to help me, the way you carried yourself. I know talent when I see it. Jamal blinked in surprise. Me? But I don't know anything about business. Charles chuckled. That's where you're wrong. Business is about instincts, hard work, and integrity. And you've already got those. I want to offer you a chance, a mentorship, a job if you're ready. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. This was real. This was happening. The question was he ready for it? Jamal sat frozen in his chair, his mind racing. Did he hear that right? A mentorship? A job? This wasn't something that happened to kids like him. It felt unreal. Charles Donovan leaned back in his chair, observing Jamal's reaction with a knowing smile. I know it's a lot to take in, kid. But let me tell you something. Opportunities don't always knock twice. You remind me of myself when I was younger. Jamal swallowed hard. But I don't know anything about working in an office. I've never done anything like this before. Charles chuckled. And that's exactly why I want to mentor you. You have something you can't teach. Determination, a good heart, and the courage to take action. The rest, You'll learn along the way. Jamal shifted in his seat, still unsure. What kind of job are you offering? Charles smiled. We'll start with the basics. You'll work under me, learning how business works from the ground up. Think of it as an internship, but with real experience. I want you to see how deals are made, how money moves, and most importantly, how success is built. Jamal's heart pounded. He had never thought about a career like this. His biggest worry before today had been how to help his grandmother with bills, how to survive another week without getting into trouble. But he hesitated. I don't want to mess up. What if I'm not good enough? Charles leaned forward, his voice firm but encouraging. Jamal, let me tell you something about success. It's not about knowing everything from the start. It's about having the courage to start it all. You already proved you have that. The rest, we'll figure out together. Jamal let the words sink in. It wasn't just a job offer, it was a chance at a different life, a path he had never considered, a future he had never thought possible. He took a deep breath, then looked Charles in the eye. I'll do it. Charles grinned. That's what I wanted to hear. Welcome to the team, kid. As they shook hands, Jamal felt something shift inside him. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just surviving, he was stepping towards something bigger. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, Jamal woke up earlier than he ever had before. His excitement barely let him sleep the night before. Today was the first day of his new journey, working under Charles Donovan. He dressed in the best clothes he had, which was just a plain button-up shirt and some khaki pants. He knew he didn't look like the businessmen he had seen on TV, but he reminded himself of what Charles had said. Success wasn't about knowing everything from the start, it was about having the courage to begin. His grandmother noticed his nervous energy as he paced around the small apartment. You okay, baby? She asked. Jamal nodded. Yeah, Grandma, just a little nervous. She smiled and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You've got this. You're meant for something bigger. I can feel it. With those words, Jamal grabbed his backpack and headed out the door, feeling a newfound sense of determination. When he arrived at the towering Donovan Enterprises building, he couldn't help but stare in awe. The glass windows reflected the morning sunlight, making the entire structure look like it belonged in a movie. He had never been inside a building this fancy before. He stepped inside cautiously, unsure of where to go. The receptionist, a woman with neatly styled hair and a sharp business suit, gave him a curious glance. Can I help you? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Jamal cleared his throat. Yeah, I'm Jamal. Mr. Donovan asked me to come in today. Her skeptical expression shifted slightly, and she picked up her phone. After a brief conversation, she nodded. Mr. Donovan is expecting you. Take the elevator to the top floor. Jamal swallowed hard. The top floor. That's where the real power was, wasn't it? Taking a deep breath, he stepped into the elevator, watching the numbers climb higher and higher. His heart pounded as the doors opened to a massive office space with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the entire city. Charles Donovan stood near his desk, talking to a group of well-dressed executives. When he saw Jamal, he grinned and waved him over. Gentlemen, Charles said, placing a hand on Jamal's shoulder. This is Jamal, the young man I was telling you about. Jamal felt all eyes on him. He wasn't sure what to say, but Charles's confidence in him gave him strength. This young man has the potential to do great things, Charles continued, and today is the first step toward that future. Jamal straightened his back, realizing that this was more than just a job. It was a test. A test to prove to himself and to everyone in this room that he belonged here. And he wasn't going to waste this opportunity. Jamal followed Charles through the grand office, feeling like he had stepped into a whole new world. The executives nodded politely at him, though some exchanged glances as if questioning why a young boy from the streets was standing in their workplace. Charles led Jamal into a sleek conference room where a laptop and a stack of papers sat neatly on the long glass table. All right, Jamal, he said, rolling up his sleeves. Let's get to work. Jamal sat down, eager but slightly overwhelmed. So what exactly will I be doing? Charles chuckled. Good question. Business isn't just about fancy offices and big deals. It's about problem solving, and I want you to learn from the ground up. He handed Jamal a printed document titled Company Revenue Reports, Quarter 3. This, Charles explained, is what keeps a business alive, numbers. But numbers only tell half the story. What really matters is understanding why they are the way they are. Jamal looked at the document, feeling intimidated. He had never worked with financial reports before, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. Take a look at this column, Charles continued, pointing at the spreadsheet. This shows how much we earned, but over here we see the expenses. What do you notice? Jamal squinted at the numbers, thinking hard. It looks like the profits are going down, Charles nodded. Exactly. Now why do you think that's happening? Jamal hesitated. Maybe spending too much. Bingo, Charles said, impressed. And if we don't fix that, we lose money. So we figure out where to cut costs. That's what problem solving in business looks like. Jamal leaned in, intrigued. This was starting to make sense. As the day went on, Charles introduced Jamal to more aspects of the business. He met different department heads, sat in on meetings, and even got a glimpse of how investments were made. But the most valuable lesson came when Charles handed Jamal a small notepad. Write down one thing you learned today, he instructed. Jamal thought for a moment before scribbling, "Every problem has a solution if you look deep enough." Charles read the note and smiled. That's exactly right. Jamal left the office that day, feeling something he hadn't in a long time, capable. He was beginning to see that success wasn't about where you came from. It was about what you were willing to learn, and he was ready to learn it all. Jamal continued his visits to Charles's office, learning more about business, decision-making, and financial strategies. Every day he absorbed new information like a sponge, determined to prove he belonged in this world. One afternoon, Charles called Jamal into his office with a serious look. "I have a challenge for you," he said, sliding a folder across the desk. Jamal opened it and found a business proposal from a small startup seeking investment from Charles's company. The numbers looked good, but something felt off. "What do you think?" Charles asked, watching Jamal's reaction closely. Jamal hesitated. He had seen Charles evaluate deals before, but now the responsibility was on him. He took a deep breath and analyzed the proposal carefully. "The idea sounds good," Jamal said slowly, "but their projected profits seem too high for a company this new. It feels like they're exaggerating to get more money." Charles's lips curled into a smile. "That's exactly what I was thinking." Jamal felt a surge of confidence. He had spotted the flaw. "But here's the real question," Charles continued. "Would you still invest in them?" Jamal frowned, thinking hard. He had learned that business wasn't just about numbers. It was about people. If the company was being dishonest now, could they be trusted in the long run? "No," Jamal finally said. "If they're lying about this, they might lie about something bigger later." Charles clapped his hands together. "Excellent answer. In business and in life, you have to trust your instincts. Sometimes walking away from a bad deal is just as important as making a good one." Jamal nodded, feeling the weight of the lesson. Later that evening, Charles invited Jamal to dinner at an upscale restaurant. As they ate, Charles leaned in with a more personal question. "Jamal, what do you really want to do with your life?" Jamal stared at his plate, thinking, "I want to help people like me, people who don't get opportunities." Charles studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Then keep learning, because one day you'll be the one creating opportunities for others." Jamal felt a fire ignite inside him. He had started this journey by changing a tire. Now he was changing his future, and he was just getting started. Jamal's confidence grew with each passing day. He was no longer just the boy who had helped Charles with a flat tire. He was now someone with knowledge, ambition, and a hunger for success. One morning, Charles surprised Jamal with an invitation to an exclusive business gala. It was a high-profile event where investors, CEOs, and entrepreneurs gathered. Jamal had never been to anything like this before. "You're ready?" Charles assured him as they stepped into the grand ballroom filled with wealthy and powerful individuals. Jamal felt out of place at first, surrounded by men in tailored suits and women in elegant gowns. But he reminded himself of what Charles had taught him. Confidence was key. As they mingled, Charles introduced him to influential people. "This is Jamal, a sharp young man with a bright future," Charles said proudly. Jamal shook hands with a man named Mr. Thompson, a venture capitalist. "So Jamal, what's your story?" Jamal took a deep breath. I met Mr. Charles when I helped him with a flat tire. I didn't expect anything in return, but he gave me a chance to learn. Now I'm here, learning about business and hoping to one day create opportunities for people like me." Mr. Thompson raised an eyebrow, impressed. "That's an incredible journey, young man." As the night continued, Jamal realized something important. Success wasn't just about money. It was about connections, reputation, and making an impact. Before leaving, Charles handed Jamal a small envelope. "Open it when you get home," he said with a wink. That night, Jamal sat on his bed and tore open the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Your journey is just beginning. I see greatness in you. Keep pushing forward, Charles." Along with the note was a check, enough money to start something of his own. Jamal's hands trembled. This wasn't just a gift. It was a challenge, a test to see what he would do next. Jamal stared at the check for a long time, his mind racing. It wasn't just money. It was an opportunity, an investment in his future. But with it came pressure. What would he do with it? How could he make the most of this chance? The next morning, he met Charles at his office. "I don't want to waste this," Jamal admitted, "but I don't know where to start." Charles smiled. "That's the first step to success, knowing what you don't know. Now, let's figure it out together." Over the next few weeks, Charles guided Jamal through the fundamentals of business. They discussed everything from budgeting and investing to marketing and leadership. Jamal absorbed it all like a sponge. One evening, as they sat in Charles's office, Jamal hesitated before speaking. "I've been thinking about starting a business that helps young kids from my neighborhood. There are so many like me, smart, hardworking, but without opportunities." Charles leaned back in his chair, nodding. "That's a noble idea. But remember, good intentions aren't enough. You need a solid plan." Jamal spent days researching and brainstorming. He decided he wanted to create a mentorship program, one that connected successful entrepreneurs with underprivileged youth. He envisioned workshops, internships, and financial literacy programs. When he presented his idea to Charles, the older man was impressed. "You're thinking beyond yourself, Jamal. That's leadership." But there was one major challenge: execution. How would he make this work? How would he convince people to invest? Charles placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Every great business starts with a leap of faith. Are you ready to take yours?" Jamal took a deep breath. He had come so far, and now, standing at the edge of something big, he knew there was only one answer: yes. Jamal wasted no time. With Charles's guidance, he started working on a concrete plan for his mentorship program. He named it Future Path Initiative. The goal was clear: to provide young kids from struggling neighborhoods with the guidance, skills, and connections they needed to succeed. The first step was finding supporters. Jamal reached out to local business owners, community leaders, and even some of Charles's wealthy friends. At first, many were skeptical. "Why should we invest in this?" one businessman asked during a meeting. Jamal stood his ground. "Because talent exists everywhere, but opportunity doesn't. I was lucky. Mr. Charles helped me when I had nothing. Imagine how many other kids could succeed if given the same chance." His passion was contagious. Slowly, people started listening. Charles personally introduced Jamal to key investors, and soon donations started trickling in. Next came the real challenge: getting kids to believe in the program. Jamal returned to his old neighborhood, talking to schools, churches, and community centers. At first, many teenagers dismissed the idea. "A program won't change anything," one boy scoffed. "Life's still unfair." Jamal smiled. "You're right, life isn't fair, but that doesn't mean we stop trying." He told them his own story, how he had been standing on a street corner just like them, when one act of kindness changed everything. Slowly, interest grew. Parents encouraged their kids to join. Volunteers signed up. Future Path Initiative was coming to life. One night, Jamal sat in his small office, donated by Charles, staring at a list of names. Dozens of kids had signed up. This was real. This was happening. He picked up the phone and called Charles. "It's working," he said, his voice filled with excitement. Charles chuckled. "Of course it is. Now, the real work begins." Jamal nodded. He wasn't just changing his own life anymore. He was changing others. And he was just getting started. Months passed, and Future Path Initiative flourished beyond Jamal's wildest dreams. What started as a small mentorship program had transformed into a movement. Young kids who once saw no future for themselves were now setting goals, learning new skills, and believing in possibilities they never imagined. Charles watched proudly from the sidelines. "You've done something incredible, Jamal," he said one evening as they stood outside the newly opened Future Path Center. The building, funded by donations and Charles's support, had classrooms, a library, and even a small workshop for hands-on training. But Jamal wasn't done yet. "This is just the beginning," he replied. "I want to expand, reach more cities, help more kids." Word of Jamal's story spread across news outlets and social media. People were inspired by how a single act of kindness, a young boy helping a stranded millionaire, had led to such a powerful change. Donations flooded in, and Future Path initiatives soon had chapters in multiple states. One day, Jamal received a letter from a young boy named Malik. The letter read, "Mr. Jamal, I was going down the wrong path, but your program saved me. Now, I want to help others just like you helped me." Tears welled in Jamal's eyes. This was exactly why he had fought so hard. At a grand event celebrating Future Path's expansion, Charles took the stage. "Jamal didn't just change his own life, he changed mine too," he said. "He reminded me that wealth isn't just about money, it's about the impact we make." As Jamal looked out at the crowd, families, mentors, children filled with hope, he realized that the flat tire on that fateful day wasn't an obstacle. It was a turning point. A simple act of kindness had rewritten his future, and now he was doing the same for countless others. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like, comment, and share this video. Let's spread the message that kindness can change lives. Subscribe for more powerful stories that will move you. And tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a life-changing moment through an act of kindness? We'd love to hear your story.